Good afternoon, everybody. Class is called to order here. My name is Betsy Fischer Martin, and I'm a former journalist and television news producer, currently on the faculty at American University, where I teach campaigns and politics and run an institute on women in politics. And it is my pleasure to moderate this esteemed group of strategists and friends with us here this afternoon to discuss, will policy positions and records matter in 2024. I will give you the brief bios. The full bios are on the website. If I go through all of them, we'll be here for the whole hour. So let me start to my right with Chairman Michael Steele, of course, former Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Maryland, former Chairman of the Republican National Committee, longtime friend of the show, and also famously endorsed Biden in 2020. So interesting things to explore there. Next to Chairman Steele is Stephanie Cutter, longtime Democratic strategist, communications professional, worked on the John Kerry campaign, '04, the Obama campaign, and has lots of good war stories to tell. So thank you, Stephanie. Next to Stephanie is Sara Craig, who is our first time with us at this conference. So we will, yes, we'll be very nice to her, but we're incredibly excited that she could be with us. And she is the executive director of the Republican Governors Association, and also the former chief of staff to the governor in Iowa, Kim Reynolds. And she commutes back and forth from Des Moines to D.C., so she'll be able to be our on-the-ground eyes and ears on what's going on in Iowa, which will be terrific as well. And at the end, we have Joel Benenson, of course, incredible pollster and strategist, has been on a number of different campaigns, was the lead pollster for the Obama campaign and senior strategist for Hillary Clinton. And we're delighted to have Joel with us as well. So welcome to all of you. I thought for this segment, as opposed to debating issues, which is always fun to do, right? But taking advantage of the fact that we've got some incredible strategists here, and how do they think about the issues? What's going to resonate with voters and why? How do they think about advancing an issue or depressing an issue? And kind of giving us a window into the strategic thinking that goes on when we do think about issues, because I know we've talked, the issue debate has come up a lot today, but I thought I would kind of frame the big, and they're really not issues, but the big elephants in the room for each candidate, and think about how we can kind of go beyond that. And when I think of Biden, of course, I think the natural component is, okay, the age. Okay, age is not an issue, it's just an existence there, right? And on the Republican side, for Trump, it's his persona, right? It's the chaos that we talked about earlier. And so how do we think about going beyond that? Joel, you wrote an op-ed recently in the New York Times and addressing that age issue head on and saying, you know, it's imperative to move beyond that, and here's how to do it. Just take us through a little bit of your thinking on how Biden can move past the age issue, beyond going to a fountain of youth. It's going to be there, and how does he minimize that and turn this campaign into some other issues that could be more beneficial to him?
Suffice it to say, I would definitely discourage him from going to a fountain of youth. I think that would be a bad message to send. Look, I think what he's got to do is, and his team has to do this with him. This has to be done in partnership. His schedule has to be managed carefully. You can't deny the fact that he's, you know, an octogenarian, right? That's the reality. People slow down at a certain point in life. All of us do. But this job is the most demanding job in the world. And they've got to make sure that even in the rigors of a campaign, that they don't overwork him, that they make sure they get him to settings that are most conducive for his style of communicating, whatever that may be. Anzo could probably know more about that because he's worked more closely with him than I have over the years. But I also think that he is such a likable person, and he is such a family-oriented human being, that they have to I would suggest that they utilize those strengths and really try to shape communications and events around opportunities that showcase those characteristics that are the ones people still like in him the most. And he still is the leader of the free world. So he still has to do certain traveling. He still has to go to places that are important, and he still has to speak out on things that are important. But I would do those things carefully. I would do it with some restraint of managing the schedule, which I think they're on to already, and play to his strengths as much as you can. What are the areas? I mean, look, he's in the Middle East. He knows foreign policy. You know, he did that trip, and you know, do things like that. Don't, you know, try to think that he's a, you know, 50-year-old running for president. He's not. And he is a likable person, and I think even people who may have questions about, you know, his age at this point, I think they still like Joe Biden, and I think that, you know, you always have to play to your strengths and inoculate against your weaknesses. So, you know, if you want to show him riding his bike once in a while, okay, but I wouldn't overdo it, right? Like, otherwise it's going to look like you're just contriving something. So.
Right. But Stephanie, from an optics point, you're a longtime communication strategist. I mean, optics matter out there. And when you see him taking a tumble, shuffling around, I mean, that stays in the mind of voters. And so how do you think about trying to change some of that narrative and deal with this age issue head on? Is it something that he should, you know, be more open talking about? If you were going to be giving advice on this, what would you do?
Well, I think there's two pieces to it. There is the optics, where, you know, don't use that staircase leading to the front of the plane.
Right.
You know, make sure there are no sandbags holding down anything on the stage that he can trip over.
Yeah.
You know, and how the advanced people think about where and what he does, where he goes, what he does, that will really matter. But it is no secret that Joe Biden he's 80, right? And it is also no secret that Donald Trump is just a few years younger.
Right.
77.
77. Thank you, Joel.
You got it.
And Biden's schedule is a lot more challenging than Donald Trump's. So, you know, we are more than a year out from the election. We have many months to go before the Republican primary is over, and then it becomes a choice between the two of them. And that, I think the age discussion changes a little bit. Joe Biden's not going to get younger, but neither is Donald Trump. And as president, he can go and do things as a matter of his job that show him in charge, that show him being the commander-in-chief. I mean, he, you know, didn't hesitate to fly to Israel in the middle of a conflict.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Lynn. I love this participation. And so I think it's a matter of showing and doing, but doing it within the confines of not making a mistake. Like, I probably wouldn't show him riding his bike because there's a pretty big risk he's going to hit a dirt pile and slide off it, you know? And those mistakes will stick with people and will be, you know, sensationalized in the media because they always are. If I could just, can I take it in a slightly different direction?
Of course.
So what Joel said about reminding people what they like about Joe Biden is really the most critical thing that could overcome age. I was listening to, and this was not, you know, the Biden campaign didn't do this, the Biden White House didn't do this. Some of the families of American families who either had people killed or kidnapped as part of the Gaza attack. And, you know, this father said, you know, this was supposed to be a 15-minute call. And an hour and 15 minutes in, Joe Biden wouldn't get off. And we were yelling at him. We were screaming. We were crying. And he just kept saying, keep yelling at me. Keep yelling at me. you need to do this, yell at me. And when you feel like you need to yell more, call me back and I'll be here. This is part of what you need to do. And that, like, there is nobody else.
And that sets up quite the contrast
Yes.
with former President Trump in many ways. You
Oh,
can't
absolutely.
imagine that happening. Right?
Yes, and I'm not going to get on my soapbox on Donald Trump, but the contrast, there's literally nobody else that would be able to do that like Joe Biden does. And those that's organic. And they also need to set the stage for those. I know that's a little bit of an oxymoron, setting the stage for the organic things to happen.
Helping things along.
But it's putting him in those situations where he can shine through, where he does really well. And it's not necessarily behind a podium. It's sitting at a table in a diner somewhere.
Right.
I don't know, Steph. We don't stage things in politics.
No, never happened.
Definitely not.
But Chairman Steele, I want to get your thoughts on that too, and whether you think Biden can get past the age issue, and also the refrain from the Republican Party, from some candidates, certainly in the primary. Nikki Haley has said this more than once. You know, a vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the issues, and I mean, that's probably a whole nother panel, but, but, you know, that is something that it seems like Republicans are going to be using in more of a general election context.
Yeah, you know, I think Joel and Stephanie have kind of laid out the important elements of the framework that the Democrats need to focus on, which unfortunately, in my view, as a former party official from grassroots level on up, they were woefully inept at doing over the first 18 to 24 months of his term. They allowed narratives to develop around the president and the presidency that were inconsistent with the success they were having, that was inconsistent with the man himself, to your point, about that likability. There was a reason why the country turned to him in 2020, and it wasn't just because it was just this anti-Trump animus or bias in the system. There was something also appealing about the individual that resonated with a lot of Americans, myself included, having known the president for many years before he became president, when he was a senator, and knowing that thread about him made it easier for me in the context of a democracy discussion to weigh the candidates in a way that a lot of Americans weren't necessarily told to do, because we were invited to weigh these individuals through a exclusively political lens, a red one or blue one, a D one or an R one, not the more holistic lens of an American lens. How do you see the American presidency? How do you see the American president? Legitimate questions in 20, even more legitimate question in 2024. So I think that the narratives around both of these individuals going into this cycle is very much those aspects of their human qualities. You're absolutely right. And when you said it, I could feel it. Joe Biden telling this family to yell at him, right? That would not happen with Donald Trump. You yell at Trump, you're now off the list. Right? It becomes personal. Don't ask me, just ask Benjamin. Just ask Benjamin Netanyahu, right? And so the reality there is how these individual personalities of these men, regardless of their age, will frame the way the American people see them. Because in our country, the American presidency is an extension of ourselves. Our elected officials are an extension of us because we ask them to represent us, right? So presumably you're not asking a misogynist, individual to represent you if you're not a misogynist, right? Not to say that you are or you aren't one way or the other, but we don't look at it exclusively like that. We don't narrow it down to these very, very small things. It's big picture. So the story of Joe Biden on the call with families who are in crisis is an important narrative to get out in front of the American people at this time. Don't wait 6 months before the election week and say, well, during the Gaza crisis, Joe Biden had a phone call. Well, okay, that's nice, then. Now you help shape the narrative. Then you have to shape less of it because you've already told it and formed it. And then you can begin to talk about other things. And this is true for Donald Trump. Look, Donald Trump is going to use, and this has already been addressed before, he's using his legal issues as a weapon against the system, as proof that the system is corrupt, right? You do not start a presidential campaign by telling your supporters, I am your retribution, unless there's a nexus, a link that you want them to get from that. And what is the expectation if you have from someone, if I say to you, I'm your retribution, what's your expectation at that point? Right? So we have to understand the dynamics of how these two men are talking to their bases in the first instance, how they're laying out the narrative. And it's different for Joe because he's the current president, so it's more than just his base, it's the entire country in some respects. But for Donald Trump, for him, it is a reminder to his base, remember why we danced together, all right? Remember why we danced together. And to the rest of the country, it's going to be a broader argument about why it's important that you dance with me now. Because dancing with Joe Biden, he's likely to fall in the middle of your dance step. He's likely to have a misstep. He's likely to forget your name, you know? And so these are narratives that the Republicans have already begun to set up about him, right? But here's the point. There's no counter-narrative from the Democrats. There's no counter-narrative so far to that. So a stumble over sandbags is in the news for 4 days. Why? Because you've got no counter-narrative to that. And so it becomes true for a lot of voters out there, irrespective of how they feel about Joe Biden, how much they like him. I like my grandfather, but when he falls, I'm like, okay, there he goes again, right? And you say, oh, what do I do to help him? So I don't want you to go out. I don't want you to be involved. No, we're not going to do that activity anymore, right? You want to start to protect them and sit them down. And that's the risk the Democrats run if they allow those narratives to continue to proceed the way they are. Voters will say, you know, I don't want him to be hurt. I don't want him to be harmed. You should just sit down. And that's not a good political space for him.
Well, on that same vein, do you think sort of what we're seeing now, the war in the Middle East, I mean, are these big leadership tests for Biden? And is he going to, you know, will that resonate with voters in a way of, you know, seeing him, you know, handle a wartime crisis? Obviously, we've that came about.
Oh, they're huge. It's a huge test for him. And by all accounts, he's passed the test. I mean, look, I watched Brit Hume on Fox say this speech was incredible and it's one of the best speeches that Joe Biden has given. And in fact, probably one of the best a speech a president has given on a crisis like this in a generation. That says a lot. Now, the question becomes, how do you translate that politically? Because we're in the business of translation. That's what we do. We translate, whether it's, you know, these two incredible pollsters who have their fingers on the pulse of the American people and then translating that for the politicians and the political operatives and the chairman of the party so that we can then go out and rally our bases around these narratives and these storylines. It's all about how we translate. So we're looking at these principal actors in their moment. Donald Trump in his, you know, legal crisis. Joe Biden in his Ukraine, Gaza, Jerusalem crisis, and we're evaluating how they're responding in the moment. And so it's very much a dynamic opportunity for the president because, to your point, Stephanie, he can always use the tools of his office to make the next point, right? There's always a reason for the president to do something.
Right.
And so how he uses that is important. And he's used this. And I hate to put it in these terms, but I hope people understand what I'm saying. He has understood the moment of this crisis, and he's spoken to it and led in it in a way that sort of transcends partisanship, all right? Because, again, Fox News said, yeah, not bad. But also helps set up the conversation he wants to have with the country when it becomes more political. When the dynamics, to the point you made, of when the bell rings in next spring after the Republicans have their nominee and they're engaged, what that looks like. Or he can go, well, remember I did this and I did that, and so we'll see.
Now, Sarah, even because you're new, don't worry. I'm not, as an initiation, going to ask you to provide advice to the Democrats, so don't worry.
Thank you.
But I am going to ask you, on the Republican side, back to this notion of former President Trump using, the courtroom as a campaign stop kind of notion, and using these legal issues, as a rallying cry for his base. Talk about that strategy.
So I think there's a couple of things I want to point out. One, the national narrative around the entire presidential campaign is not the actual campaign that's happening on the ground in the states. And so, I have the benefit right now of being in Iowa, where I am seeing gobs of TV commercials for the candidates because I'm one of the targeted voters that they're going after. And so, you don't hear, when I get mail pieces from Donald Trump's campaign or see TV ads, it is not about the courtroom. That is all being played out in the media. That is not being played out on the actual campaign and what's being talked about on the ground.
It's like show for cable.
It is
right?
show for cable. It is not actually what they're targeting real voters with in the actual campaigns. So, I just saw, before I flew over here, a TV ad in Iowa that was really powerful, I think, for both a primary election and for the general election, which kind of plays off of what we've already been talking about. And it started with the line, Donald Trump will keep America safe because he kept America safe. And then it goes through the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, Russia invading Ukraine, the crisis at the border, everything happening in Israel and the Middle East right now, and how Joe Biden, all of this happened under Joe Biden's watch. None of it happened under Donald Trump's watch. And so, we can all talk about what's happening in the courtroom and that Joe Biden had this great moment of, his speech that he gave to Israel, which I agree was fantastic. But how many people actually are hearing that? They're seeing these TV ads and they get this sentiment and this feeling that, yes, I was safe under Donald Trump. None of this stuff was happening under Donald Trump. It is happening under Joe Biden. And so that, I think, is what you're going to see play out maybe a little bit more in the campaigns. Because remember, we don't have national elections in America. We have individual state elections, and we have the Electoral College. And so, I love everyone in New York and Washington, D.C., but the election is going to be won in states like Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin. And so those are the things that we need to be looking at. What are those voters hearing? What are they talking about? The courtroom stuff is just kind of a sideshow. It does motivate his base, but it's also, I think Bettina said this earlier, when everyone's the most racist person in the world, you become numb to it. And so it becomes Donald Trump, every single thing that he does is bad. And so when he actually does something bad, people have tuned it out. And so there's just a lot of noise around it right now that I think the average person, the average voter, they're trying to figure out how to feed their family. They're trying to figure out how to get their kids to school. They're trying to figure out how to make sure that their kids have a better life than what they had. And so that kind of stuff becomes a distraction and not necessarily something that they're going to vote on.
Sarah, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
I get everything you say.
I might not have the answer.
Well, it's about what you just said, so I assume you do. But why didn't any of that work for Trump against
I think
Biden the
that
first
Trump
time?
would have cruised to re-election if it hadn't been for COVID. And COVID kind of upturned the entire electorate and everything that was happening. And if you look, the economy was going in a really good place. More people were employed than there were before. And then suddenly COVID hit, and there was just a dynamic that completely changed. And so I think the 2020 election is something that we've never experienced because you had a very, very odd space in the electorate at the time. That's my personal opinion. You could disagree with me, but.
So if
go ahead.
how would you explain 2018 then? And presidents are in office to deal with national crises, and COVID happened, and where it hurt Trump was his mishandling of it. And we can disagree about what happened
and
when
politicizing
and politicizing it, and that that had an impact because people were already preconditioned for it. So whether or not he would have cruised for re-election if COVID hadn't happened, there were no signs of that in the electorate at that point. Who knows what would have happened? But if you look at 2018 and how Trump was handling his presidency between 2018 and February, March of 2020 when COVID hit, there was already sentiment built in the electorate that was going to work against him. And remember, in these national elections, which are largely won in 7 or 8 states, the Trump base is a hardcore base, which you can speak to better than I can. The Democratic base is also a hardcore base. The Trump factor for the Democratic base was a big motivator, and it mobilized a lot of Democrats, but it also mobilized people in the middle that are traditional swing voters, don't always vote, but they swung. And it was not just COVID, it was a lot of things building up. What happened with Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, just his, we don't need to go deep on Trump. I'm literally trying to do this panel without talking about Trump. And if I could, I wanted to bring one other thing up, and Betsy, I know I'm filibustering, but if you remember how Biden ran his campaign, and we have one of the experts sitting right here, he rarely ever mentioned Trump. I mean, I produced his convention. Trump, the word Trump never came out of anybody's mouth. And
He still doesn't.
he still largely doesn't. They've delved into that a little bit, but that's not how he won.
Yeah.
There was a very implicit, in many ways explicit, without even having to say it, contrast. But I don't think Biden is going to have a big change in tactic in how he runs this time.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually want to echo a little bit of what Sara was saying, because I appreciate where Stephanie's landing the plane on 2018 and sort of setting up the takeoff for 2020. But I think there is some evidence to suggest that absent a major event like COVID, Trump was poised. He was very much poised for re-election in 20. Now, there were a lot of other dynamics that would come into play and would be factors as well. But I think that the singular thread in all of this conversation are voters, and how those voters are themselves kind of weaving in and out of the fabric of politics, and how they're sort of creating their own narratives for whether we agree or disagree, whether we're left coast or right coast or north, south, doesn't matter. The American people largely are sort of shaping how they want this thing to play out on a number of levels. And I think one of the interesting dynamics that was still a challenge going into 2020, and this is where your point, Stephanie, about COVID becomes important, was the expectations and understanding dynamic in politics was thrown out the window in 2016. Because you had a whole group of people who thought Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president of the United States. Just as we saw a whole group of people thought that there was going to be this wonderful, incredible red wave, right, in 22. And all those expectations crashed because the American people had a different idea. And to this day, we're sitting here and still don't know what the American people really are going to do in 24. Because there's going to be a whole lot of landscape that they're going to be on, but not necessarily play on. And they're not going to tell our friends who do the polling what they're really thinking, if they tell them anything at all. All right? And so there's this, the American people have kind of figured out, okay, y'all been playing the game on us, we got a game for you too. Right? And I know from my experience, having been a county chairman and a state chairman, having been on watch at the emergence of the Tea Party, and having spent the first 6 months of my term as national chairman in conversation, detailed conversation with a lot of pissed off Republicans, right, about where they thought the party was going, the big government policies of the Bush administration. The lack of constitutional adherence. These things matter, but what I discovered it didn't just matter to the right. It mattered to Americans. And the political parties were the ones that tried to separate the sheep from the goat, the wheat from the chaff, instead of realizing it's all still one thing and understanding the constituent parts of it. And the American people kind of figured that out on their own. So I think the dynamics going into this election for someone like Trump, which is why if we're really honest about where we're sitting at 4 o'clock, right? Today, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are in a competitive head-to-head race for the presidency of the United States. And you could take a coin right now and flip it. The problem is the American people are the ones who have the coin. And they're ultimately going to decide. And the challenge for our parties is going to be, how do we create the narratives for them, all right? So that when they flip that coin, they see what we're trying to say. Mm-hmm. And both of these candidates are good at those narratives. Biden in his way and Trump in his. And we need to be smart about that, because 2016 shouldn't take us by surprise again.
Well, I want to rewind a little bit, because you're talking about Trump had been poised to win. He's also, fair to say, poised to win the renomination. And so, with a nod to my friend Rob Collins and his Tim Scott candidacy.
I'm sorry, Rob. Yeah. I didn't mean to blow by our boy Tim.
Yeah,
I'm sorry about that, man.
But Sara, just to pick up on the Iowa, this is ground zero of the primary in many respects. As you see it, when we think about issues, now Trump is not even appearing in the debates. It is, who is going to be that alternative? When we think about issues, are there particular issues in this primary that are going to differentiate any of these candidates to emerge? Or is it, who can be the best alternative? We have these debates, but do issues really matter in this primary?
A little bit. So I don't know how much you all know about the Iowa caucuses, but they're wild. Yeah.
I know.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
They're wild.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's over 1,700 precincts, and people have to show up at 7 p.m. and actually vote. I mean, it's can take an hour and a half of people's lives. So it's really the barrier to entry to vote in the Iowa caucuses is pretty high. And so in turn, you get an electorate that is not representative of a broader, in Iowa, for example, the highest turnout we ever had in the caucus was in 2016, and that was like 170,000. So it is not a large electorate. Of a population of 3.1 million people, 170,000 turn out to vote. And so it is easier to move and change that electorate because it's so small and it's so dynamic, and just it's easier to kind of have a effect on something that is that small. So yes, I do actually. I think the abortion issue is a big one, because a lot of the people who turn out to vote in Iowa in the caucuses are evangelical, and so some of them have decided that they do not support Donald Trump anymore. Now, some of them have definitely stuck with him, but
even though he delivered the Supreme Court justices,
Yep.
he is not definitive enough on the.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just, that there's some of them are just looking for an alternative. And so
Right.
you have a group of pastors who have suddenly started shopping around and deciding who they're going to support. And so there is an opening, I think, for him to be beat in Iowa. It just then kind of, where does that go down the line?
Yeah.
And I am Switzerland in this. I have no, whoever comes out of it is who the nominee is. And in the role that I'm in, I'm pretty neutral, but it's his. I think he's poised to win, but there's definitely an opening. And when you have an electorate that is that small,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to change than when you have a large electorate, like Rob was talking about earlier. California is a huge portion of the electorate, and that is a national campaign. You're
Right.
never going to be able to go meet
Many
the voters.
ways.
But Donald Trump has come to Iowa
Yeah.
multiple times. All of the other candidates, Ron DeSantis is traveling to all 99 counties in Iowa. God bless him. And so, who knows?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the abortion issue, because I do want to get to that. And I guess I'll peg off of that with you as well, because And for those students who are not from the U.S., in the U.S. we have these crazy off-year elections that we call them. And so we have three big governor's races this cycle here in 2023, as well as a Virginia elections that people are watching, legislative elections in Virginia. The Republican, I'm from Louisiana, and we do things crazy there. We voted early, and the Republican won pre-runoff, so you've got one pickup there. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But when we look at Kentucky, Kentucky and Mississippi are the other two, but when we look at Kentucky and the abortion issue in particular, what is that going to tell us about the abortion issue in 2024?
Everyone, there's this media narrative right now that abortion is going to make or break the election in Kentucky, and I can tell you flat out that is not the case. In fact, DGA has spent $20 million in Kentucky. Andy Beshear himself has spent $20 million on TV. So
This is the Democratic incumbent.
The Democrat governor, and the Democrat Governors Association together will spend $40 million on TV there. The Democrat Governors Association has put 11 ads on air. 0 of them on broadcast TV have dealt with abortion. Andy Beshear has put 18 ads on TV. Only 3 of them have dealt with abortion. So in the 50,000 gross rating points that have been put on TV in the city, in Lexington market, which is the largest media market in the state, only 4,000 of those points have dealt with abortion. So less than 8% of the actual, what's being spent on TV is on abortion. And so there's this narrative that whatever we learn in Kentucky, and if Andy Beshear is reelected, then it means that Republicans lose on the issue of abortion. That's just flat out not true. I think that both parties, I think Kiki may have said this earlier, I think both parties have issues with abortion because there's a lot of Democrats and a lot of the abortion rights activists are pushing positions on abortion that are way outside the mainstream and not what actual voters are supportive of. It goes way beyond what most countries in Europe have, most countries around the world have. And so when you're looking at, abortion up to the 40th week, no limits on abortion, government completely staying out of it completely, that is not where voters are either. And so I think, there's a lot of attention and focus on where Republicans are on abortion, but I think Democrats have their own pitfalls that they have to watch when it comes to this issue as well.
Joel and Stephanie, do you want to weigh in on that? I could see you were sort of
Well,
making
I'm
a
not sure
face.
what data Sarah's reading about 40 weeks. I don't think that's a popular position in the Democratic Party at all.
I don't think
Well,
it
you
is,
said,
but it's definitely
it is
a
not.
position where some states are.
Well, which states are pushing a 40-week?
Virginia, they're literally
You've named one. Name.
Colorado, Washington,
Yeah.
New York.
Okay.
And when politicians say the words, I should not be talking about this at all, it is between a woman and her doctor, the government has no role in this, what does that mean? The government should not have any
How many of those have
laws.
been signed into law, Sarah?
Well,
One?
no,
Or none?
there are several that have been signed into law where there is no limit on abortion. I'm just telling you, like,
but I mean, Joe Biden's position is codify Roe, and as long as Democrats and Republicans have been debating abortion, and it's been a long time, we've always gotten hit with, oh, you want to have abortions at birth, and that's not the case, and it also doesn't happen. But there may be candidates out there that have more extreme positions. The position of the president, and what you'll be hearing a lot about, is codify Roe, which most Americans, a supermajority Americans, find very reasonable.
Chairman Steele, though, and we mentioned this earlier, how does Trump talk about abortion in this race that doesn't alienate his base?
My initial response to your question was on the first part,
Yeah.
out of both sides of his mouth.
Okay.
Then you put the back part on. Then you put the back part on it, and it's a slightly different answer. I've known Donald Trump a long time. I've worked with him before he got into politics. I know where his views are on this issue, and it's not aligned with the traditional view of the Republican Party. But he's been able to deliver something that the party fought 50 years for, and that was an overturn of Roe. And as Rob and others suggested in the earlier panel, the discussion suddenly changes when you catch the car. When you get the thing that you've been struggling and fighting for 50 years, now
What now? Yeah.
And I think what you're seeing play out across the states, to Sarah's point, on both sides, is a reaction to the now what. So you have Democrats who are somewhat taking a stronger position that's counter with respect to the president because of the stronger position that the Republicans who, prior to Roe, said that we want the states to decide. And then once they got Roe, said, now we want a national ban. It's two different conversations with two very different consequences for women. And so you're seeing this pull. I appreciate that Roe is not going to be a top-line voter issue, but baby, trust me, it's going to be an issue. Do not think that women are just going to go quietly into that good night on this issue in 2024 when they have a chance to vote on a president and a Congress and a Senate that will set the table for the next generation on this subject. Either creating a federal ban or leaving it to the states or whatever the hodgepodge that the bullshit comes out of the mouths of candidates who are not going to be honest about this issue, right? Which is why I said the both side
Exactly.
part. That's going to be something that's going to be an underlying test like democracy was, that was a sleeper issue. I remember seeing polls in July and August of 2022 where democracy was the 15th, 16th, 17th issue in the minds of voters because what was driving it? The economy, inflation, prices, gases, gasoline. The weekend before the election, that Tuesday, the last poll showed democracy was the #2 issue for voters who planned to vote on that Tuesday. So please don't sit there and think that because they're not talking about it now and it's not registering and it's going to play out a little bit different here and there. Trust me on this one. And Kansas and Wisconsin are just the beginning of the bell that's being rung on this issue for Republicans and Democrats. It will be important for women, and it will be important for how both parties, my party and your party, talk about it and frame it, all right? Because you are not going to get away with out of both sides of your mouth on this issue. This isn't the age of I'm personally opposed, but. We're beyond that now because there are lives and consequences at stake. Is no longer this ideological battle. It's real. And it's real for a lot of people. And here's the thing for my fellow Republicans, not the ones in the room, because I know you guys understand it, but beyond the room, and I say this a lot, it's real for a lot of Republican women too. All right? They showed us that already. So I think we need to be smart and sensitive. At the same time, we can do that. And I think our political leaders, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or if it's someone, Tim Scott, for example, whoever that is, don't sleep on this issue.
Well, and Stephanie, who do you think is out there in the Biden world that is going to be the most effective communicator on that particular issue? Because I think most people would say it's probably not Biden himself.
No, but he's come a long way.
Okay.
I, too, have known him for a very long time, and he really has come a long way. You know, I think the vice president has been taking on this issue and has been doing a college tour across the country. And this is one of the primary issues that comes up, along with gun violence, on these big college events that she's doing. So I think you'll see her. I also think it's not just going to be a women's issue. I think all surrogates affiliated with the Biden campaign will be talking about this.
And Joel, if you're advising the Biden campaign on sort of how to position themselves on the strategy, what issues to be out there most talking about where would you put abortion in that? Or would you be leading with the economy? Would you be leading with other issues? How do you think about what kind of issues to elevate from the president himself?
Knowing the president a little
Yes.
bit personally,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have him making choice an abortion,
Right.
Because of his personal feelings about the issue, and, he is pro-choice at the end of the day. But I wouldn't make that front and center of the campaign. I would definitely make it a piece of the campaign. But he's done other things here that I think are, excuse me, that are probably closer to what I would think about at this point. I would have him talk about climate change, actually. That would galvanize young voters in a
Yeah,
way.
we were just talking about it,
And make movement on that. I would take on the race issue head on in this country. Democrats have a 10-point advantage in polling I've seen on who's better to deal with race relations in this country. I wouldn't, again, I wouldn't, we do have an advantage on the choice issue, but that's going to be a personal issue for him. I would lean into guns. I think we know that right now, parents across this country are very concerned about guns and gun safety, and he's got a record on this that goes back to his days in the Senate. And so I think it's authentic for him, and I think, he could talk about it, that we have to solve this problem in our country. We should not have people being able to carry guns into schools, anywhere. We should make sure that there are people who shouldn't have guns, don't get them. We should toughen the laws. I think that's all within his realm. How much he could get through would be another question. But I think you've got a lot of swing voters who are in line with some of those issues that would put Republicans, I think, on the defense a little bit.
I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, so I'll open it up if anyone has questions. Eugene?
Of course, the reporter has
Yes,
questions.
exactly.
For Joel and Stephanie, one of the things I always find really interesting is, and it was brought up a little bit at the beginning, is there seems like a lack of Biden defenders on television. I have a contract on MSNBC, even on MSNBC, there often feels like, beef here, CNN and MSNBC. But there often feels like there's a lack of defense of Biden when, like, he trips and falls, right? Like on the age question. People seem like they don't want to engage on certain things. And so what that often leads reporters to believe is that they don't want to defend him, right? That there's a reason why you wouldn't go on there and say, he tripped, but who cares? You know what I mean? My grandpa trips and I don't care. Like people, even that, like those 4 days, as the chairman was saying, was everybody just talking about how he fell and he's old and not a lot of defenders. And even, we did something at Politico where we talked to a lot of the bookers at MSNBC, CNN, and these other places. And the White House and the campaign don't send people out that often. When Dean Phillips was going around saying that that somebody should run other than Biden, he was on Meet the Press that day. And, there was an open invitation for Biden folks to come on and defend that, and they chose not to. And so I guess my question is, heading into 2024, one, should they change that kind of strategy that I don't want to get y'all in trouble, but should they change that strategy? And two, why up until this point do you think there's been such a lack of that defense?
Can I just do a caveat? I have defended Joe Biden on television.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
By
By a lack of, there's no one.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Like
and
that-
then
I think
also,
also-
just to add on to that, though, too, I mean, is the media too fixated on this?
Yes. So
Oh,
I
now
guess
it's
I
our
have a
fault.
couple of questions back for you. The having Biden defenders on after he trips, do we know that bookers are trying to get people on to talk about that?
Sadly, yes, I can tell you they probably are.
I mean, I wouldn't take that as a sign that people don't want to defend Joe Biden. Maybe they don't want to talk about an 80-year-old tripping and don't want to feed into, the media obsession with that when there are a lot of other things happening in the world that impact people's lives. Secondly, on Dean Phillips, the White House can't put anybody out in reaction
the
to Dean
campaign.
Phillips, but the campaign could. the campaign doesn't really, at this point, they don't have a set of surrogates that would be meet the press material.
Well, they have the co-chairs, right? So you have Gretchen Whitmer and all
Yeah.
of these folks, members of Congress, people who are governors. They could be out
Well,
there.
they don't want to. They don't want to be out talking about Dean Phillips.
like, if
It's
you
like
do
Trump
that-
not doing the debates. It's
Whether
like,
you
why-
agree with the strategy or not, the thinking probably is, why do we want to validate this
Exactly.
no-name guy
Yeah.
that is not going to be president,
that no one's ever heard of.
that no one's ever heard of? It's just going to give him more of a stage. So it's more of a strategic decision, not that there's nobody to do it. It's a strategic decision. So I totally get your point. I wouldn't read too much into this in terms of support for Biden.
Chairman Steele, have you been asked to come on to talk about defend the trip?
To defend who?
To defend Biden's age?
No. I haven't been asked to do it. I mean, I think the age thing is kind of silly in the main. But I think this conversation exploits the point and exposes it so well. I'm sorry. The one thing I learned from the former mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, and if anyone,
Here we go. Here's the playbook quote of the day.
That's all I'm saying.
Jean.
All right, so we're talking. Kick is like, hold up. Is you always communicate through the narrative. You do not give the ground. Regardless, you do not give the ground because your opponents will not. I can assure you, and I know the Republicans in this room will back me up, if this script were reversed, it would not be an issue. It would not be a conversation. There would be a series of talking points, and having been in the room on very, very, very gnarly issues, and understanding this is how we communicate on this issue relative to the President of the United States. Because we want to make it very clear, our President is strong, he's ready, and he's right. Right? And everything feeds back into those three narratives. Our President is strong, he's ready, and he's right. We get it. I don't know why the Democrats haven't figured it out yet. I'm being honest here, because the communication piece is the thing. And the fact that it's even an issue now, we're discussing it and listening to I don't think the president, the White House shouldn't. Here's the deal. Let Joe Biden do Joe Biden. He's the president. He's a former senator. Let him do his thing. But where's the rest of the party? Where's the rest of the infrastructure that's supposed to be out there making sure that he's ready and he's right? And that's just not the case. So these narratives will continue to explode around his feet. And trust me, I'm just telling you, it doesn't get prettier from here. It doesn't get better from here. Because when the establishment is full on engaged, right? When you've got gubernatorial, senatorial, congressional, county executive, candidates all around the country on the same page with the same note, what's your response to that going to be? Waiting for the Biden campaign to give you one? So that's going to be a real interesting challenge and test. And the folks in the White House, they're chomping at the bit, but they can't engage politically because it's the White House. So where's the political arm? Where's the DNC? Where's the DCCC? Where's the senatorial committee? Where are all the other components that are out there forming that not defensive but offensive line?
So can I?
Last
think
word,
we are-
Stephanie, because then we have to
Okay,
wrap.
we are talking in huge generalizations. And I want to be clear. I was explaining what the thinking probably was. It doesn't mean I agree with it.
Right.
There are a lot of people out
Disclaimer.
there talking and defending the president every single day. And members of Congress, plenty of governors. And it's, we're at the point where the race is largely about the Republican infighting and not so much on President Biden. So naturally, you're going to see
That will
more.
evolve.
Yes. This
Yeah.
is going, over time, this is going to evolve. And you know, I'm not in charge of what they do. I'm not making those decisions. But I would hope that there is a strong surrogate strategy being built as we speak to somebody to hit
Yeah.
the switch, and it, you know, and people filter out there. But
All right, well, I'm getting the hook. We're out of time. Joel, Sara, Stephanie, and Chairman Steele, thank you very much.